let me just take a moment to tell you a little bit more about our authors, starting with David Keplinger. David is the author of 7 books of poetry. Recently, Another City, in 2018, which was awarded the 2019 UNT Rilke Prize, and The Long Answer, Selected and New Poems, published by Texas A&M in 2020. He's also the 2020 recipient of the Emily Dickinson Award from the Poetry Society of America. His work has appeared in Ploughshares, the Paris Review, the American Poetry Review, and other journals. He's joining us from Washington, D.C., and he teaches at American University. Today, he'll read from his latest, The World to Come, which is a book-length meditation on creation and destruction. After David reads, we'll hear from Rick Campbell. Rick is a poet and an essayist living in Alligator Point, Florida, and I have fond memories of that. So I thank you, Rick, for joining us from one of the best places in the United States. His most recent collection of poems is Provenance from Blue Horse Press. He's published 6 other poetry books, as well as poems and essays in journals, including the Georgia Review, Prairie Schooner, Gargoyle. He's a Pushcart Prize. He's won a Pushcart Prize and an NEA Fellowship in Poetry. He teaches in the Sierra Nevada University MFA program. In Provenance, Rick looks clearly at life with father, mother, brother, and dead, where the past arises in poems that read like beautiful, sad postcards. And rounding out our poetry event today is Arhm Choi Wild, a queer Korean-American poet and author of Cut to Bloom, which is the winner of the 2019 Write Bloody Prize. Arhm received an MFA in poetry from Sarah Lawrence College, and their work appears in Barrow Street, the Massachusetts Review, Split the Rock, and others. They have received fellowships from Sewanee Writers Conference and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, and they were a finalist for the 2020 Poetic Excellence Prize from Button Poetry. So in the latest publication of poetry, Cut to Bloom is an exploration of what it takes to unlearn the survival instincts of trauma, and asks, what does it take to choose our tools instead of wearing down the ones we've been handed? Thank you, 3 poets, for being here today, and it's a pleasure to start with David Keplinger.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Malaprops, and also Mildred, who helped to set this up. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be reading from this book. It's called The World to Come, and these are all prose poems. I think with prose poems, it doesn't matter as much how they look on the page, except the fact that they're boxes. But knowing that ahead of time, I think, makes a little bit of a difference. So this poem, these 3 poems are part of a series called The 7 Spheres, and that's at the center of the book. And I'll explain a little bit about the book after I read them. The sun. It is not to grow up, but to be given the chance to grow old, one of your uncles said on his 90th, half his own size, a person crushed by light. It is not to grow into or outward. It is to burn away, to condense, surrender, thicken. Whatever burns by its own light will do the next right thing. Don't waste your time grieving for the pliable knee, the blue stalk of the heart, the sudden wide awake brain, which frets its way forward by thinking backward. And to pass through the sun was the first gate, which burned away the rest of everything you'd carried with you until now, belonging not to you, but to the other lives. The moon. I came here for a body and will not leave until I get one, I told the old clerk of the moon. He was thin. He was as wan as Bartleby, staring at a point just past me. I'd prefer not, he said, and shook his bald head. The offices were cold. I was shivering, less than naked, without a body. As is expected in these kinds of interactions, the clerk pushed up his small glasses and I began to beg. I had nothing to barter but my impeccable, perfect lack. Have mercy on me, was all that came to mind. It was only then he sighed as he slid the first fingernail, as small as a doge's gold ducat, across the surface of the desk. And this is the last poem in the series, and it's called Saturn. Saturn is the most beautiful place, and its rings are composed of shards of what will happen. One of the shards is the book about the bear whose mother is waiting for him on the moon. One of the shards is the grip of a whole fist on my finger. One of the shards is my fist gripping a finger. One of the shards is hair, black hair. One of the shards is a theatrical bow with the bounce of the healthy spinal jelly. One of the shards, a painting of the St. Severin Cathedral. One of the shards is the ice of the morphine. One of the shards is the Keats read out loud in front of the death mask in Rome. And one of the shards is the Keats read out loud in front of the life mask in Hampstead. One of the shards is a name. In fact, there are many names which can't be spoken but only shine, for nothing but to shine, following with ease the natural law. So that series of poems, there are 7 of them, where the soul passes through these planets. And the planets each have a particular kind of metal that pass along traits to the personality in the medieval view of how a soul gets a body. So these 7 spheres all represent different kinds of personality facets that the soul picks up along the way. And I wanted to compose this book with that in mind. I wanted to create a kind of book of spheres that the soul passes through and then sheds halfway through until at the end it disappears. This is a poem called The Age of the Onion. The Onion is a book of revelations diced to proverb size. This is the age that pours hot tears, that agitates the seeing eye. This is a waning age already late. On the cutting board, the onion stripped and wet lit up our dark kitchen in the city. This is the onion whose center is oneness, onionness, the union in my glass of gin. But not an age, not really. Too brief for an age. This is a flash saute with the quick of the heat and the wine, the oil spitting back. Betelgeuse, the sun Betelgeuse. When it's compared to our sun, the red giant Betelgeuse is 1,000 times as large and of an impressive spectral type, but much more fragile, even ephemeral. Most of its girth nothing more than cough syrup viscosity as it expands and passes over hanging, ululating worlds in space. Aren't you afraid it will drown everything? A body out there is saying to itself as they stand by a window, if you can call it a window, while swallowing hard, the muscles pulsing at the back of the throat, if you can call it a throat, in the dark of the mouth, if you can call it a mouth. And this poem from the same section is called Photon. It was only when their phosphorescence left us that we realized the photons had been here at all. Trillions draped like a sweater over an Amish chair, or traveling as pilots on flecks of dust streaming from the barn window. The horses knew and threw back their wild eyes. The roosters knew and tried to communicate to them, or to us, the urgency. It was dark now, and all of our eyes were closed, and the photons had left the world. Like the blessed dead in William Blake, they had ascended their cascading wave, but very quietly. So in the third section of this book, what happens is that the soul is challenged to disappear, beginning with the parts of the body. So there is a kind of burning away of the body that leads to this invisibility at the end. This is a series of poems that I haven't read anywhere else. I for some reason, you get into this thing where you read parts of a book and not the other parts. So this is a part that I never read from, but we'll see what happens. This is called Hunter's Marriage Vow. I will sit with you under the trees, under the threshing, under the sky as soft as sea pelt. I will draw it down around you. Nothing dies for nothing. A pig on its spit, too far from the flame, cooking too slowly. The bright red cheek of our child, too close to the flame, growing too fast. My skeleton will glow against your skeleton until we both burn through, and we'll begin to see the person underneath our bodies. Who goes there? I'll ask you in thousands of ways whenever you enter the room. Angels and Wounds. A play called Angels and Wounds by David Keplinger, which goes on for years and has no curtain, where the author plays one of the parts. In some scenes, it's the wound in him that sees the same wound in the other. What's reenacted is an old disaster. In some scenes, it's his angel that addresses the other's wound, or it's reversed, and he is the wounded one, drawn to the angel. Codependence casts its green light on the stage. There's hardly any dialogue except the sound of silverware, bottle caps, slamming doors, but in some cases, the angel in him engages the angel in the other. It's the same play his parents put on, and he plagiarized everything. One of my great heroes is Vera Rubin, who I got a chance to hear speak maybe months before she died, about 10 years ago. And it was Vera Rubin who came up with the concept of dark matter. The dark matter that holds all of this together, and it's mostly stuff that we can't see. We don't even know what it is. Trying to find a name for that. So this is dark matter. 9 parts out of 10 of these sentences are made of dark matter. 2 sentences whose dark matter cleaves them are, I must find out what I know how to do. I must do what I know how to do. I might decide to study fullness, but I need not. I might decide to study emptiness, but I need not. Vera Rubin, mother of dark matter, said, we're out of kindergarten, but only in about 3rd grade. What holds words on this page? It's another sentence's beginning somewhere else that's forming this sentence's end. I remember how it was for us, learning to loop the cursive on a piece of lined paper, tissue thin like crepe, rehearsing the shape of my name. And I'll just do one more. This is the title poem. It's called The World to Come. The warming has started. In the north, the dogs have grown so thin their bones show through. In the south, the parks lay flat as wet tablecloths. In the east, no more flying violinists. Instead, there will be death announcements hammered onto the kiosks again, and the shoppers, their thin hair sprayed into saurian horns, dark henna red, will carry their bags to the meat shop as always, the bread shop as always, the bull's blood shop as always to the shop that sells the white cabbage. In the west, at the automat, Edward Hopper's solitary customer has taken off a glove. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate a reconsideration of the power of campfire light to change the body. And I also appreciate an introduction to Vera Rubin. I did not know that. And so I'm sure there are members of our audience as well who are going to learn more about her and her contribution to science and dark matter. Love that. Thank you, poets. And next up will be Rick Campbell. Thank you so much, Rick. Rick, we need to ask you to, there you go.
All right. So you had to unmute me and I had to unmute me. It's like a double thing to make sure I don't say anything dumb. I'm going to read from this book, Provenance, the latest. And I'm going to read for the most, I think I've read from this book a lot since it came out. I'm going to read poems that I don't think I maybe have read before out of this book. I also noticed, I was thinking about this, that the poems in this book are, for the most part, except for the prose poems, a lot shorter than my early other books. I think I'm running out of things to say. So can you still hear me? Yes, you can.
Yes, we can.
There's a little box in front of my face that says unmute yourself. So this one is called Smack in the Middle of Nowhere. It's sort of like a joke. Somebody on the radio said something, such and such a person lives in the middle of nowhere. And I started wondering where that was. I was about to say that you have to wonder where the middle of nowhere is, but of course you don't. You might wonder about recovering or dying from cancer, or the brakes on your car, young mothers dying in the hospital. You might wonder if your lover still loves you, might wonder if Trump or some other idiot will fuck up the world beyond repair. You might wonder if it's already beyond repair. But say you do wonder about the middle of nowhere, not so much where it is, but can nowhere have a middle? Or maybe more cosmological, is there a nowhere? Is it some deep space void thing beyond our instruments' ken? If it's there, do you know it when you feel it? Despair, loss, ennui. A place worse than being no man for real, not just a product of O's wit, cunning, and guile. I hope it's not some silly Zen thing, like the sound of one hand clapping, but maybe the Beatles version, a nowhere full of nowhere men. I'm supposing against logic that it exists because I'm trying to find it, sticking pins on a wall map, Idaho, Alabama, DC. Sorry, David. This next one is a poem from my mother. I inherited an old electric skillet from her And it only had it only worked on high. So that's sort of a little part of this. And also, I imagine that my mother likes Glenn Miller maybe more than she did. So this poem is about my mother and Glenn Miller in a way. Cooking my dinner with Glenn Miller. My mother's old electric skillet, dial stuck on high, sizzles mushrooms, onions, and peppers. A squeaky tape plays Glen Island specials, hi-hat snare. He was my mother's favorite. She graduated the summer war came calling, danced to Moonlight Serenade. Her beau joined the Air Force and she a secretarial school in Charleston. Wistful and Blue was top 10. Sun Valley Jump hit the charts as Churchill tried to hold the good world together. FDR knew we were sliding, but not how fast the slope. He had eyes on the Germans as the Japanese came out of the sun. My mother did her part, cutting off lights, rationing fuel, sending boxes to her boys. 30 years after Here We Go Again, we watched football as she fried chicken in a trailer in the South Florida sun. One palm tree shading nothing, fan big as an airboat, roaring hot air down the narrow hallway. The boy who danced with her Charleston nights flew a B-17 that never came home. I forgot to thank everybody for inviting me to do this, so let me do that right now. I'm going to read a poem that is set here, more or less. There's a little stretch of highway that goes west from Alligator Point down to Carabel and Apalachicola. And there's a place where it gets so close to the Gulf of Mexico that I imagine that there's all these ways you could die there. You know, you could flip your car into the water and drown. You could get eaten by crabs as you're drowning. It would be rare, but a shark could get you if you tried to crawl out of your car in the water. On the other side of the road, there are an alligator and rattlesnakes could get you. There's also bears that can get you, but this one's sort of about an armadillo in a way. It's called Armadillo Crossing. You care about them. Okay, yes, the love of my friend's life used to call him my armadillo, but we figured that was more metaphor than fact. Though now that she's gone, he sometimes hides in his shell. He's not armored, but tender if you find him out in the world. Nature's beyond our ken, no matter how carefully we search it for meaning or hope. The black bear took out the front end of a Subaru when it crossed the road. Armadillos and gators, though the latter rarely cross the road, do so without warning signs. Slow children get our caution. Fast children seem to take care of themselves, but often crash when they're grown. This next one, I guess, is an allegory. For the last 5 years, I've lived here, and almost every morning I take the dog and we walk on the beach. And this is sort of an allegory or a poem. I'm speaking in the voice of those creatures on the beach. It's called Seashore. Not very creative. Some of us were caught sleeping, others looking the wrong way. Ghost crabs belly up, hermit crabs hoarding water in whorled shells. We should have paid more attention to the sea, tide, and time. We watched early morning walkers, too sure of ourselves, our instincts, our peculiar talents. The neap tide left us lost, and what we found was more desert than shore. Maybe we were lulled by the everyday news of the sun and wind, the moon's coming back again and again. Did we attend irrelevancies? or is this the way things are? Too late to debate determinism. The horseshoe's 20 feet from the water's edge. Periwinkles gasp below the sand. Our stories end here. For crustaceans, no resurrection, rapture, or repair. We left that to those who needed it, and now we wonder at our lonely wisdom. The gulls are winging in. Actually, I think this is going to be I'm going to read a short one. So I'm going to read two more, a short one and then one that's a little bit longer. I saw a little clip probably on NPR or the Weather Channel or something like that. And I was just taken by the idea that it was so cold up in Minnesota or somewhere that they said they were burning the railroad tracks to thaw them out. So this is called Burning the Railroad Tracks. 40 below. Ropes doused in kerosene blaze down the tracks, parallel into the dark future. You can ride this train blind, ride your sins long past penance, to Fargo, Grand Forks, even beneath Bemidji, that place in your soul where you wake with a crow staring into your blinking eyes. On any small rise, you can see straight to Canada. The fiery tracks, real or imagined, show you the way to Winnipeg if you're fool enough to go. And this is the last one I'm going to read. Some people who've heard me do this before know that I usually talk way too much between poems, or, well, of course, I don't think I talk way too much. Somebody probably does. But given our shortened time, I feel like I'm flying through these. But this is a poem. I went to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming, and I never liked my father. We were fairly well estranged, and I hadn't seen him for a while. And I found out, I guess from my stepmother, I found out that he was having open heart surgery back in Pittsburgh. And that's more or less the subject of this poem. So again, like I say, this is the last one. This one was in Prairie Schooner. I was proud of getting a poem in there. In Cheyenne, I consider my father in surgery. Wide streets, few trees, cowboy boots in the window. Dust in the wind smacks like gravel, wearing down enamel and desire. We park, look for beer. I'm wondering about that knife in your heart, chest cracked, spread bone to bone like an angel, staked down, waiting its due. It's been too long. I don't care. She thinks I should. I think I should. The jukebox disappoints me. No Bob Wills, no Orbison or Buddy Holly. Dance floors 100 feet deep and empty as a grade school on a Saturday. Rodeo days long gone. How can lovers drink here after the stars fall down? They cut you. It's routine. You ought to be alive, but this far away, I don't know. Wind rocks the truck, my knuckles white on the wheel. Snow in the front range will blow down through Laramie tonight. I love to watch her undress. Small waist, sweet breasts, long black hair. We have a bed on the floor. You don't know where I live. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Rick. I probably never look at an electric skillet in the same way again. And surgery that has heavenly imagery attached to it, well, that's the poet's craft, right? So thank you for bringing that to us. All of you poets who've joined us for POETRIO really have this red thread of family and lived experience of estrangement or connectedness. And I wonder if you have a moment or two in this last few minutes we have together, if any of you would be willing to talk about what poetry does for you in your life, and maybe even how others around you experience your poetry. I'd be curious to know if those close to you, or those you're not close to, I guess, as well, how do they understand your poetry and interact with it too? Any takers on those questions?
Rick, you're muted, I think.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I thought, poetry was like my identity and sense of self-worth and, what I did best. And so it was really, really, really important then. Now I just like it. Now I like to write poetry. It's not, I'm almost 70. It's not quite as crucial. If I haven't figured out who I am now, it's not going to happen. And, but I've always had a sort of, my family didn't, not that they didn't care about my poetry, but it was a small family of non-readers. And so I never had much of a relationship that way. Of course, most of my friends most of my friends were probably writers. And so poetry was central to probably almost all the best friendships I have. So it's a kind of 50-50 or glass half full, half empty. And now all my family, except for the family I grew up with is gone. So it's a strange question. I'm not sure not sure about poetry's importance to me anymore beyond it being what I like to do. It's not the defining principle it used to be, I guess.
For me, I would say that poetry is in many ways a way to write myself or people who might share similar identities as I do into the narrative, to kind of work against erasure. As a queer Korean American kid growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I most certainly never came across other stories that looked like mine, right? It took a lot of work in my adult life to even learn my own history of my mother country, because it wasn't taught in American high schools in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or maybe many other places for that matter. So there's so much about being the one to tell your own story as opposed to it being told by other people, and where it becomes, active empowerment. And I think also a way to kind of create our own maps and our way forward. I'm so tired of seeing queer stories that end in sadness, either, people ending up in straight relationships or, committing suicide or really struggling with mental health in some way. And I think also I'm really interested in how poetry can provide reflection at the intersections of our identities, right? Where queerness isn't just following along the lines of one particular racial identity, but can be complicated by other considerations of, filial piety or my fan expectation that we don't air our dirty laundry, right? So how do I balance that with this need to be the one to tell my own story and kind of take the reins of that back from other people who try to tell it for me?
Have you, Autumn, had responses to your work from the people around you? Do they get what you're doing, or do you end up having to even try to explain yourself further?
Oh, good question. It's interesting to think about who is my audience and who isn't, and how to celebrate the people who might innately understand what my poetry is about, and how to put little like keys or gifts or within my poetry, for them to find like, oh, I know exactly what that means, and I don't think everyone is supposed to know what that means. Because I know when I'm reading something and I'm like, wow, I get that. It feels like the special connection that I get to have with the author, that I really love and get a lot out of. I think when I was starting off as a writer, I really struggled with being understood by a wide audience. I mean, who doesn't want to be well-read and widely read? But now I think as I evolved and I have a clear sense of who I'm writing with and among and to, there is such delight that comes from people who innately might understand. And I think, a lot of people understand my poetry that I wouldn't necessarily think might understand and can connect to something in it that surprises me. And whenever I come across those connections, those are really special as well.
Thank you. David, do you have any thing to add about what poetry means in your life? It could have changed over time. And Rick, jump in again too if you want to. And also, how do people respond to your poetry, particularly the ones around you, close to you, or even not close to you?
I was afraid you were going to circle back to me. But
you can skip it. You don't have to. You don't have to answer it.
It's such a broad question that I've been sitting here thinking about how I might answer it. Poetry has become, I don't know if it started this way for me. I do think that it started as a means for me to name who I was, as apart from the people from which I came, to in one way include myself among them, and also to distinguish myself from them. I think a lot like Rick, my parents were not readers necessarily, but they were great storytellers and hilariously funny. And there was a lot of sharing and engaging and encountering through humor and storytelling in my family, but not a lot of talk of books. So I kind of came to books in a roundabout way. And I think I started writing before I started reading deeply. I think that writing took me to reading deeply. And now poetry has gotten to a place for me where I don't talk about it that much, other than, at my job where I talk about it all day. I mean, I say the word poetry every day, and I have for decades. So that's something. But I think that there's a part of this process for me that's very secret, that I keep to myself and that I don't name. I found it very poignant, that moment in Autumn's poem about not naming what it's like to experience an olfactory sensation for the first time, because there's nothing that words can bring to that. So there's this sacred part of it that doesn't have a name, that I hold very close and very dear, and that part has gotten wider and broader, I think, and has seeped into how I step into the world quite a bit as I get older.
Well, thank you so much for exploring that question with us today. We only have a few minutes left, and I wonder if any of you would like to share an influential poet or two, or if not a poet, a writer could be. And David, you can probably see this coming. I'm going to make it really broad, even if it's not somebody published. If it's just somebody who shaped you or influenced you all, if you care to share that.
Well, I'll continue by saying that I read a few really influential books just in this past year, and that this is a golden age of poetry. Things are happening in contemporary American poetry that I never would have dreamed were possible when I started out on this journey. And there are people around me who are just blowing me to pieces. I read a book by Rick Barrett called The Galleons. A central moment in that book is that research is mourning, that the more we find out about who we really are below the surface of appearances in this country, the more we have to experience grief and mourning. And we see these little galleons everywhere we look, depicting, colonialism and its wreckage. Shayla Sabri's field study, a younger poet who won the Laughlin Prize from the Academy of American Poets. I hope that you get that book in your stores. It's an incredible ledger of a book. And Monica Sook's A Nail the Evening Hangs On, which came out a year and a half ago. It was just a tremendous book that Copper Canyon put out in 2020. So those three are my favorites right now.
Thank you. I'm furiously taking notes, so thank you very much. Autumn or Rick? You're unmuted, so you or Autumn can go. Welcome back. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you. My battery died. Frank Gaspar, Keith Ratzlaff, well, Philip Levine, of course, John Prine, Bob Dylan. Yesterday, Molly Fisk, Brian Turner, Patricia Smith.
Wonderful.
Mostly John Prine and Bob Dylan at the moment, though.
John Prine gone too soon.
I guess. How long's long enough,
Not long enough with John Prine. I wasn't done with him yet, but he was done with us.
I don't know how much older he was than me, so I guess if he should live longer, maybe I get to as well. How's that?
I like that. Thank you. Autumn?
I'm actually teaching a workshop right now with Kundiman that's looking at all queer people of color's work. So I have a great stack on my desk, so I'm very ready for this question. But picking just a few out of it is really hard. I would have never imagined as a kid I would have such an amazing a stack to choose from. But I can't highly recommend enough Hall by Zandria Phillips. They won the Lambda Literary Award last year in poetry. Such a brilliant collection. Daylight by Roya Marsh came out 2 years ago. I feel like the kind of experimenting and commentary and just like the heartfelt and power of these poems are, I love teaching that book. I'm sure everyone knows this one. Won the Pulitzer last year, Post-colonial love poem. Incredible. I'm learning so much from it. Just in the way, like not only her content, but her formal choices are really pushing back on colonization in all the different layers of poetry, which I love. And this, I cannot recommend enough. Mary Jean Chan Flesh, they are a UK-based queer poet, and talk about finding a mirror that is life-changing in many ways. I think that might be the book of poetry of like, oh my gosh, like this is someone who I am kin with, and it does something to you to realize that you're not writing alone. So yeah, those have been some really influential books for me recently.
Well, I want to thank you all for helping us further stock our libraries. We're going to do that. And anybody who, if you missed anything, the link you used, you can come back and you can do like I did and scribble furiously. And I get all these and listen to some music and think about everything our poets have introduced us to and changed our minds about and allowed us to reconsider. And that seems to be one of the great joys of listening to poets read. And I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much for joining us for POETRIO. I'd like to say David Keplinger, Rick Campbell, and then Arhm Choi Wild, our poets today for POETRIO. We wish you well. We hope to see you maybe sometime in the store. Please come back to us and stay with us and keep writing because we need you. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us for POETRIO.